Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Life of Dante by Giovanni Boccaccio. Now, Life of Dante is actually a biography about the famous Italian poet Dante Alighieri, who is most famous for writing the Divine Comedy. And this is written by Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived just a generation after Dante, so he lived pretty close to Dante's time, and Boccaccio is almost as famous as Dante. Like, Boccaccio wrote a book called the Decameron, which I haven't read the whole thing of that yet, but I read part of that in college, and it was a pretty interesting book from what I've read, but basically, Boccaccio also lived in Florence, which was Dante's home city, and and basically this is a biography about Dante, and what's interesting about it is this was written in the 14th century, so this is a very, very early example of a biography, and it's also the first biography to be written about Dante Alighieri, and it's definitely an interesting book. If you're interested in Dante Alighieri, like if you're interested in his life, it's definitely an interesting book to read. Now, Dante Alighieri, like I said, he wrote the Divine Comedy, which is a three-part poem about the afterlife. The first part of the poem is the Inferno, the second part is the Purgatorio, and then the third part is the Paradiso. Now, so far, I've only read the first two parts of the poem. I've read the Inferno, and I've read the Purgatorio. I still haven't read the Paradiso yet, but, so I haven't read the whole thing of the Divine Comedy yet, but, Dante, from what I've read by him, he's definitely a poet I really like, and, and I found this to definitely be a very interesting book. It's also interesting the fact that this is written by somebody who is really almost just as famous as Dante, like, because I've known about Boccaccio even before I even heard about this book, so, Boccaccio is a very famous writer. He was also from Florence, and, but basically this whole book is a biography about Dante Alighieri, and what's interesting about it, though, is it's actually narrated by Boccaccio, and, and Boccaccio really does give a lot of his own input, like his own opinions on certain things, like throughout the whole book. Like, the book talks about how Dante was exiled from Florence due to his political activism, and Dante was, of course, grew up in Florence, so, but there's a chapter in this book where, Boccaccio is really kind of condemning the Florentines, because, like, Dante, of course, loved his home city of Florence, but, he, of course, was exiled from Florence. He was exiled from his home city, and there's a chapter in this book where Boccaccio is really condemning the Florentines for doing this to Dante. So he gives a lot of his own opinions in it. It's definitely an interesting book. Now, there's also a chapter in this book where Boccaccio talks about Dante's love for Beatrice, who is a girl that Dante met when he was 9 years old, and she was 8 years old at the time, and Dante, of course, absolutely fell in love with this girl Beatrice, but to my knowledge, Dante only met Beatrice like maybe 4 or 5 times in his entire life, so, and what happens is Beatrice actually died at the age of 24, and Dante, I believe, was 25 at that time, and, and Dante was completely grief-stricken by Beatrice's death, and, like, he was according to this, like, he was a complete wreck because of, the death of Beatrice, and what happens is his friends and family actually, arranged for him to be married so he can get over Beatrice's death, and, of course, the arranged marriage, didn't necessarily work out for Dante because Dante, of course, married this woman, but and he actually had children with this woman. But according to this, Dante really did not like the woman he was arranged to be married with. He didn't really like her at all, and, you know, and it's kind of interesting how Dante, like, he talks about Beatrice so much in his poetry, and yet she's a woman who Dante only met 4 or 5 times in his entire life, and, you know, and of course he never talks about his actual wife once at all in his poetry, so, you know, that's kind of interesting, you know, in some ways you can't help but to feel sorry for the woman, I guess, but then again, in my opinion, I think arranged marriages are kind of immoral. I think you should only marry who is really who you genuinely love, not who you're arranged to be married with, but, you know, but yeah, that's just my opinion on that. But yeah, The Life of Dante is definitely an interesting biography. If you're interested in, you know, Dante's life, I would definitely recommend checking this out. And also, if you're interested in, like, biographies in general, and you want to see a very early version of what biographies were like back in the 14th century, then I would definitely recommend checking this out. So, yeah, that's my review on Life of Dante by Giovanni Boccaccio, and bye.